Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Boar's newly relaunched YouTube channel. It's been 14 years since this channel was last active, and as your editor in chief, I'm happy to announce its return, albeit a very belated one. Please consider subscribing. It's taken a lot of work behind the scenes to get this channel set up, and it's something we'll be using a lot more moving forward. And what better way to start than an interview with Clive Myrie, one of the UK's most highly regarded journalists. Clive has worked at the BBC for over 30 years, and in that time has covered some of the world's biggest news stories. In this interview, he outlines his journey from a young paper boy in Bolton to becoming one of the world's leading presenters. Now, without further ado, let's roll the tape. How are you doing today, Clive?
I'm really well, Luke. It's great to see you. And hello, everybody out there. All you Boar listeners, readers, watchers, all the fans out there. It's great.
Right, well, it's great to have you, Clive. So I think it's worth mentioning that this interview comes off the back of the release of your book, which is this little thing right here. It's your memoir titled Everything is Everything, a memoir of love, hate, and hope. Now, if it's okay with you, there's some things in this book I found very interesting I'd like to allude to. However,
Mhm.
given our audience, I'd like to sort of take this interview down a more journalistic lens, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. So I think for you, your sort of career started quite early on, if I'm correct in saying, in that you started out as a paper boy and you grew up watching Trevor McDonald on the news. And I
Yes.
just wanted to ask two sort of questions, really. One,
Yeah.
what's Trevor like as a person? And
Yeah.
two, what sort of influence has he had on your career thus far?
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, I had a paper round when I was a kid, like lots of kids. And I would get free copies at the end of the day. So I would be reading these newspapers and having a sort of bit of a window on the whole of the rest of the world, what was going on out there. And I'd be devouring all these stories. I'm thinking, God, it'd be amazing to go to Japan or to America or to Africa. I was growing up in a small northern mill town, Bolton in Lancashire, and the paper was a window on the rest of the world, and TV was too. And I watched a guy called Alan Wicker, who was this sort of travel journalist. He went around the world interviewing sort of different people and finding out about different cultures and ideas. And then I saw a guy called Trevor McDonald on the TV who looked like me, spoke a little bit like me. And I thought, well, it is possible for someone of color to be able to do that kind of job. Alan Wicker was a very sort of posh white guy. And the journalists who wrote in the newspapers tended to be posh white guys too. So to see someone who looked like me on TV doing something that I wanted to do made me feel, well, it was possible. And you can't be what you can't see. And so Trevor was an inspiration. And I've got to know him over the years. He's a wonderful man, very, very modest, very charming. He's in his 80s now, but he's still vigorous and energetic, and his mind's as sharp as a tack. And he's fed up with me telling him that he has been an inspiration to me, I'm sure. But and he wasn't out on the streets sort of, marching or demanding people of color and, get jobs and diversity. He wasn't doing it. He was simply doing his job, and he led by example. And in doing his job, he made me realize that it was possible. So he's a great guy, and I count him as a friend now.
Fantastic. So as you sort of grow up, you're now about my sort of age at this point,
Yeah.
and you go to the University of Sussex.
Yep.
Now, in your book, I found this fascinating how you sort of find a lot more about yourself and that sort of transition from going from your hometown in Bolton
Yeah.
all the way down south to Sussex.
Yeah.
You sort of debate whether to do, you study law, obviously, and then you have journalism in the back of your head.
Yeah.
Um, I just wanted to ask, what's like the main thing you sort of learn about yourself in that new environment?
Yeah. I mean, university I hope for everyone who's watching this or reading about it, I hope universities where you can find yourself. You know, it's probably the first time that you've been away from the family home, from your parents. You know, you're out on your own, and it's an opportunity to frankly grow up, to find out who you are, to get a sense of what you're really interested in, away from parental influence. And I realized that going to Sussex for me was such a learning experience, not just academically, but as an individual. And finding out about, you know, the gay community down there, for instance, the LGBTQ plus community that I didn't know existed down there before I went, which was interesting. And so it was a revelation to me, and a wonderful revelation, because Brighton, which is, I mean, the university campus is actually a place called Falmer, which is just outside Brighton for the University of Sussex. But Brighton is the big metropolitan hub that's nearby, and that's where you'd go out and, you know, get drunk, go to nightclubs, whatever, all that kind of stuff. And so it Brighton as a place had a big influence on me, because it was a place that over the last century or so had embraced a sort of gay culture. And that showed to me Brighton as a town being open and accessible, and you know, wanting to be diverse, I suppose. And that was welcoming to me as a northerner and a black guy to boot. So I learned about the importance of inclusion, the importance of not being made to feel like an outsider, the idea that you're all the same, no matter what your sexual orientation or your color or whatever. I got all that from that milieu in Brighton, and I'm really glad that I did, because that's made me the person who I am now. Yeah,
And so once you've graduated, then you find yourself in at the BBC. Sort
yeah.
of two questions, really. One, how did you start off? And two, what's the biggest challenge you faced whilst reporting for the BBC?
Yeah, I mean, I always wanted to be a journalist. I mean, my parents, of course, you know, like all parents, they want, you know, their kids to do a proper job, a lawyer or a doctor or something like that. And so I studied law at university, but I never really wanted to do it. I'd always wanted to travel the world basically and tell stories. And as a result, I was doing campus radio, Radio Falmer, which was the University of Sussex campus radio station. I was on there. And I was writing little articles for free sheets and sort of pamphlets and stuff on the year off that I took after I graduated. And I was lucky in that one of the programs that Radio Sussex, which was a local BBC radio station at the time, I think it was Radio Brighton in those days. I think it's Radio Sussex now. They had a sort of community outreach program that used local students and young people to sort of produce a show called Turn It Up.
Mm.
And that show, you know, gave an opportunity for me to learn about radio and learn about broadcasting. And my year on Turn It Up, Joe Wiley was also one of the young journalists, a guy called Mark Coles, who went on to be a reporter at the Today program. So it was a great resource for young talent. And once I got into that radio station and made programs for Turn It Up, I also applied to the BBC to get on their local radio reporting scheme, and I got it, which was great. And that's how I got into the BBC, and I haven't really looked back. Um, as far as challenges are concerned, I mean, certainly at the beginning of my career, I didn't want to be defined by my color. I didn't want employers to think, oh, news editors to think, black guy, let's have him do the black story. There's a riot or something that they believe is to do with black people, then send the black guy, which is reductive, which is defining my career in a way that I didn't want to be defined. And the bottom line is, I'm just a reporter who happens to be black. I'm not a black reporter. So overcoming that at the beginning of my career was something that I was really anxious to do. And I think it's important for young people getting into journalism to want to be defined the way they want to be defined, to cover the stories they want to cover and not be pigeonholed in a particular way. So that was one of the biggest challenges, certainly at the beginning of my career. Yeah.
You've spoken a lot about the sort of emotional side of reporting. I remember you saying in your speech at Wimbledon that being a newsreader is that sort of, what's the word I'm looking for here? That kind of bridge between the
Mm,
story and the
yeah.
audience, and this idea that you seem to quite believe in that, you are human. You're not
Yeah.
supposed to, it's not a case of showing excessive emotion, but you are allowed, you sort of give yourself that space to do that. And I
Yeah.
find that really interesting. I just wanted to ask, there's a lot of things obviously that you've sort of reported on all sorts of things. We've got the likes of the George Floyd incident, um, the president election of Obama. I remember you saying in your speech, and also things like the death of the late Queen as well. I just wanted to ask these sort of perhaps more emotional things
Mm,
you're reporting on. What's sort of going on in your head as you're reporting these kind of things, and what do you
yeah.
feel you need to do?
Yeah. It's a great question. Um, you're trying to find a connection with the viewer or the reader or the listener, whatever branch of reporting you're involved in. You want the reader to not just understand the facts of the story,
Mm.
but also to have perhaps an emotional connection, because that helps drive the story home more that you're doing if people can respond to it on a very sort of visceral level. And it helps justify the work that you're doing if people respond to it in a meaningful way. And the example that I gave at Wimbledon was the connection between, why should any a person living in Burnley or Preston or Cornwall or wherever, what is the connection between them watching a TV report on a child dying in Gaza, or a family that's been devastated by the Hamas attacks in Israel? What is the connection? It's not just the horror. Oh my God, this is horrible. It's also that personal connection that you're trying to sort of that thread you're trying to sort of link with the story and the viewer. Um, and you're hoping to try to sort of make a connection that will elicit a sense of dread that it's not my child. Thank God it's not my child. You're trying to elicit a sense of anger and rage as well, that this is happening and this shouldn't be happening in the modern age. And you're also, I think, potentially trying to help change things. So, if that person in Preston sees that child dying somewhere, perhaps they'll make a bit more of a contribution to the Oxfam tin at the end of the road, or they'll take some extra clothes to the charity shop, or they'll lobby their MP, maybe. Who knows? You're trying to you're not trying to bring about meaningful change. I wouldn't be arrogant enough to say that my reporting or the reporting of any other journalist, necessarily can do that. Sometimes it can. Um, but you're just trying to make a connection. And that emotional connection can have spin-off effects that are advantageous for everybody. But it's making that connection in the first place that is key. And I mentioned at Wimbledon, covering the Obama election, and talking about how important it was for me as a black person to be reporting on this story, and that resonated with so many viewers who were watching it. But the key is you're walking a fine line. You don't make this, try not to make the story about you, number one. And number two, don't get too emotional. But I think viewers respond to journalists who are human beings. And if you see something horrible in front of you, you should be able to express that as a journalist and not be this passionate, observer viewing events from the outside.
Mm,
I don't think that fosters the kind of connection that you want, and I think detracts from the potential power of a story.
mm. That's excellent. I think with the Queen, I know this might be a bit of a sensitive question, but I wanted to ask it nonetheless. I always remember watching that on BBC News, and I remember Hugh Edwards sat there in a black suit, and I remember watching it with my mum, and I remember feeling this is imminent. And I just wanted to ask, for a story like that, what's going on behind the scenes?
Mm,
And also, if you don't mind me asking, how, what's the sort of time ratio between journalists like yourself knowing what's happened and it sort of
mm,
becoming public knowledge?
mm. Well, I mean, it varies. Sometimes you can get a heads up just before the bulletin goes out. Sometimes you can get a steer on a story while you're actually on air. In the case of the Queen, she was pronounced, if my memory serves me correctly, she was pronounced dead around about 3 o'clock
Yeah.
in the afternoon. And at that point, Prince Charles became King Charles. Now, we did not know for sure that she had passed until around about, I think it was probably no more than 10 minutes before we went on air.
Oh my.
Um, but, and it's a big but, we knew what was coming, so we were ready. And the biggest giveaway was the plane taking all the members of the royal family from the south. I can't remember where they were. Some would have been in Kensington Palace, some would have been in Windsor. Took them all the way up to Scotland, and we tracked the plane, and we knew the plane was there. And for all the family to be gathering together, that can only mean one thing. We'd
Yeah.
known throughout the day that the Queen was ill. We knew that she was getting medical treatment. So it was once we saw that plane, we were ready to go. And then it's a case of the palace deciding when they want to tell us because they don't want it leaked. They
No.
don't want someone on Twitter to put it out there. They want it to be the moment that the world knows. And remember, she was the sovereign of, so many other countries beyond the United Kingdom in terms of the Commonwealth. It needed to be a single announcement made by the BBC. And so if I've got this right, I don't think we knew for sure until just before Hugh Edwards made the announcement. And yeah, that was it. But the key thing was we were ready for it. We
Mm,
were ready for it. Hugh didn't have on a pink tie with ducks on. He
yeah.
had on a black tie because we were ready. We knew what was coming. And that was that. But you've got to be ready for, that's an extreme example where everything is prepared, everything is lined up, ready for a moment. But a lot of the time you're dealing with breaking news. I mean, I started out as a presenter on the news channel, and
Mm,
you've got stuff for you come flying at you all the time. You've got your earpiece in, people are saying, this is happening, that's happening, go to these pictures, do that, da da da. Live breaking stuff that's incredibly exciting and wonderful. The 6 and 10 o'clock news are more built bulletins. They're structured. There's less reactive stuff to breaking news, although we're beginning to do more of that in those two bulletins as well. So it's exciting live broadcasting. It's fun. And but yeah, when it came to the Queen, we knew what was coming. We were ready for it. And then when the palace said, okay, you can now make the announcement, we were ready to go.
fantastic. Um, just sort of the penultimate question, if I may.
No problem.
Um, I just wanted to ask about Ukraine. I remember you saying Wimbledon. Now you hop on a Ryanair flight for 29.99 under the assumption that Putin's not going to invade.
Yeah,
No sooner than you get there, you realize that he's invaded and now you're stuck in Kiev.
yeah.
In a few words, what is going on through your head when you find that out?
What is going on? I mean, look, um, we had not had a major war involving two national armies. So that's the distinction between Bosnia and Kosovo. I'm talking national armies in Europe since the Second World War. And to launch a war like that takes, takes a lot of madness, number one. But two, it's just rare. It just didn't happen
Yeah.
for the last many decades. And you have an international global order that means that if you do launch an unprovoked war, there will be sanctions, there will be all kinds of penalties that will directly affect your people.
Mm.
You will be an international pariah on the world stage. Your sporting heroes will be denied access to the big sporting events around the world. It's not a good thing to do. And you can perhaps make the point that you want to make by saber rattling, what you call saber rattling. So you station all these troops on the border of Ukraine and you say, be careful, I could invade. I want X, Y, Z. You blackmail, basically. And that was the general assumption that Putin would do that. He'd have the might of his troops. Ukraine's a little country compared to Russia. It hasn't got as many troops. It would be cowed just by the presence of the troops. And that was very much the sense that much of the world had.
Mm.
So I went there. Cheap flight because license fee pays money is important. Ryanair were flying direct. That's the other thing as well. You didn't have to change. So it made sense to get on Ryanair. Then, of course, Putin invades 15 hours after I arrive. And I'm a correspondent and I'm a presenter. So I stay and I do the story. Some people left. Some people were unhappy. Some people didn't want to be there. They said they didn't sign up for this. Some were in tears. They didn't expect him to invade. Now it's a full-scale war. What could happen to us? And so I had the opportunity to leave, and I chose not to. I chose to stay and to continue trying to tell the truth of the story because there's so much propaganda and rubbish out there.
Yeah.
And, the majority of viewers trust us for our impartiality, our due impartiality, trust us for our fairness. And I wanted to try to maintain that in the coverage of this conflict. So yeah, I mean, I ended up being there for 3 weeks, 2.5, 3 weeks, rather than the 2 to 3 days that I thought I would be there. I ended up going back that first year 3, 4 times. I was there last year as well. And I've made documentaries there, and made good friends there. It was an unprovoked, unjust war launched by an aggressive neighbor. That's the truth of it.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that, Clive. For my final question, many of our readers and many people watching this want to be full-time journalists in the future. In a few words, what's your number one tip?
Mm. My number one tip is stick at it. Keep pushing, keep pushing. You know, I was lucky in that I got on a BBC training course. That was a massive, massive help. But now there are lots of ways that you can get into this profession. Whether it's by starting your own blog or doing stuff on social media, getting um, uh, a presence and a portfolio of work together that you can show prospective employer. That is fantastic. And you're going to be knocked back at the beginning, of course. No one sails straight to the top. And I have got loads of my rejection letters that I keep and take out every now and again from radio stations who said, "Oh, you've got to get on an accredited course. You've got to study journalism. You've got to do this, that, and the other, blah, blah, blah." And those rejection letters, helped give me strength. keep going, keep going. And then you get into an organization like the BBC, and I wanted to be a foreign correspondent, but that seemed very sort of far away. You've got to keep pushing, just keep pushing, keep working hard. No employer is going to turn you away if you're good at the job, if you can do the job. So just try and make yourself the best you can be and keep plugging. Determination and stamina are two of the most important things in this business. And having a sense that you're worthy, having a level of confidence in yourself, that you can do this, and just keep pushing, and yeah, keep that drive. That's the key.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you ever so much for joining me, Clive. It's been an
Pleasure.
absolute pleasure.
Pleasure.
Thank
Sorry, I've got to dash. I've got to do the news tonight. So it's great to see you, Luke, again. And thanks for coming to Wimbledon. That was a lot of fun. And yeah, to all the viewers and readers out there, good luck.